very expensive power plant. It is actually the most expensive power plant on Earth. It's called Plant Vogtle. And then also in July 2025, the PSC voted to freeze rates for the next 3 years, locking Georgians into paying the fourth highest energy rates in the country. And this is really important for folks to just know kind of the past decisions that the current commission has made. Georgia is actually is only one of 10 states without any bill pay assistance, and has the highest energy burden. This means that families pay a significant amount of their monthly income on their utility bills. Georgia Power has the 5th highest utility bills and a disconnection rate that is 8 times above the national average. So this means someone who can't pay their utility bill, they actually their service will get disconnected, and they'll be without heat or without electricity until they can pay their bill. And Georgia Power actually has an 11% guaranteed profit, which is far higher than the industry norm of 9%. So essentially that means that Georgia Power makes a lot of money. And again, we don't have a decision. Most folks have to have Georgia Power as their power company. And so this is all really important to understand because the PSC is the only body that is able to make those kinds of decisions. One last thing I'll kind of talk about is data centers. I know that's something that people have been very concerned about, and the PSC in Georgia would actually decide if a data center is going to be built. That is a decision that falls squarely within their hands. And then I think the last thing I wanted to kind of talk about was related to EMCs. So there are some people who have EMC. So for example, I have Walton EMC, and I live in Gwinnett. And so even though I have an EMC and I don't have Georgia Power, we can still vote in that election. And also, it's important for folks to know that regardless of whether you have an EMC or if you have municipal energy, you are affected by the decisions that the PSC makes. Yeah, and then I think that was all that I had. I want to just make sure that if people are not aware of the decisions that the PSC makes, GCV has a really incredible one-pager that we have both on our website online and in person here at today's event. Feel free to take it. It has a bunch of information about the PSC. And this election is really important in that a lot of the decisions that the PSC makes into next year and subsequent years are going to impact our utility bills for years to come. As many of you know, Hurricane Helene had extremely devastating impacts on a lot of our infrastructure. And despite this rate freeze, right, that the current commission has kind of instituted, we still might see some residential bills increasing due to some of those storm and recovery costs. So in order to do some of the cleanup and the fix up for some of the infrastructure, that actually comes from utility, that comes from your utility bill. So yeah, I will leave it there. Happy to provide any more information. And as always, like, this is an incredibly important election. And the more you learn about the PSC, I believe, the more empowered you will feel to tell other folks, because, voting is free, but these utility bills are not. And so it's extremely important that we make our voices heard, regardless of where we live in the state. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Toha, for that really in-depth information. I hope you are all feeling a little bit more confident on what the Public Service Commission is, and that you're all ready to hear from the candidates running for office very shortly. But before we do that, want to give another disclaimer once again. We invited all 4 candidates to participate in this nonpartisan candidate forum. However, some were unable to attend due to existing conflicts, or in lieu of being here in person, they sent a proxy to represent their campaign. And so over the next, we're going to go over a little bit of information on the slides where you can learn a little bit more about who's running in your area and access some of our ballot resources. So first thing I'll ask you guys to do really quick, please take out your phones and scan this QR code or go directly to our website at gamvp.org/ballot. And I'll give you guys a second or two for that. All right, so once you access this page, it'll ask you to put in your address. And once you put in your address, so wherever you are registered to vote across the state of Georgia, once you do that, you can click Update Ballot, and it'll actually pull up a list of everyone who's running in your area for both any local offices you may have up for election, things like your city council, your mayor, perhaps even school board in some areas, as well as information for the statewide Public Service Commission race. One thing that was mentioned earlier, which I want to reiterate because it's a really important point, is that regardless of which district you live in, everybody in the state of Georgia will be voting for both seats open on the Public Service Commission. So you may not have any other race on your ballot. You may not have any local city council races or mayoral elections taking place, but every Georgian who is a registered voter has the Public Service Commission race on their ballot. So please, use this tool, share it with your friends and family. My favorite part of the tool is that you can go through and select who you would like to vote for, and then write down, print out, or email your choices so that when you go to the ballot or the polls next week, starting next week, you can easily remember who you decided most aligns with your own individual values on the issues you care about. So please use this resource as you'd like to. We'll move on to the next slide really quick. And I also want to share all of the candidates running for office. So in District 2, we have Tim Echols, who is our incumbent Republican. I want to share another resource that we have available. If you scan this QR code, second one, or go to gmvp.org/vote, it'll take you to Muslim Voter Project's voter landing page. If you scroll down a little bit, you can see where we have candidate profiles on each of the candidates running for office. So if you click on Tim Echols' name, for example, you'll see this page looking exactly like this. And you can see where his campaign has shared he stands on different issues from energy to utility costs to public services to economy to climate change. And so, again, Tim Echols unfortunately was not able to make it today. So please use this in order to learn about his campaign and his platform and understand what he wants to do with this office. Instead of joining us in person, however, he did send us a video, so we'd like to play a short video for you all. And it's
Greetings, Muslims. Thank you very much for being interested in the Public Service Commission. I have 7 children. Wendy and I have been married 42 years. I'm an ordained minister. Greetings to Georgia Muslims. Thank you very much for being interested in the Public Service Commission.
Our landing page is really robust, so not only have the candidate profiles, you'll also be able to find important election dates from the last day to request an absentee ballot to when early voting begins. Early voting begins October 14th, starting Tuesday, for those of you who are not aware, as well as early voting locations in your county. So we have all the metro Atlanta counties present, as well as a number of coastal and rural counties. But yeah, please feel free to look at that information, and let's try the video one more time.
I have 7 children. Wendy and I have been married 42 years. I'm an ordained minister, and obviously my faith is very important to me, as is yours. Religious freedom, the right to worship, is so important to me as a Christian, as a leader, as a constitutional officer here in Georgia. Also, in my role in the Public Service Commission, we've frozen rates for 3 years here in Georgia. We know the pressure and affordability issues that are out there for you and for many others. Yet we want to keep a reliable grid. We want to keep it growing. We want to provide opportunities for businesses, but we know that it's been difficult. So thank you very much for your interest in the PSC, and I would really appreciate your support. Hey, greetings.
Awesome. Do we need to play it online as well for folks? Oh, perfect. Awesome. Yeah. So again, in lieu of sending or in lieu of attending in person, Tim Eccles was able to send us this video. And please look over his platform on the voter landing page website, gmvp.org/vote, and also on using our ballot builder tool, which we shared earlier. And let's go to the next slide. All right, and then also in District 2, we have Alicia Johnson, who is a Democrat running for office. Same deal here on our voter landing page. If you scroll down and click on Alicia Johnson's name, you can see where her campaign stands on these issues that I mentioned. However, we also have a member of her campaign here today who will be able to introduce himself later, Andrew Heaton. So you'll be able to hear a little bit more from somebody who works directly with this candidate. And then I believe she did send us a video as well, so we'll go ahead and play the next video.
Good afternoon, Elite Institute. This is Dr. Alicia Johnson, and I'm so sorry that I cannot be with you today. But I want to tell you that I am so deeply humbled and appreciative of your support. This is a seminal moment in Georgia history where we can finally have a seat at the table and ensure that people are put over profits. I know that with your help, we can push all the way to November 4th and be certain that the leader in that seat is accountable, transparent, and reliable. And I want you to know that I'm looking forward to serving you well. Good afternoon.
Awesome. And once again, her platform is available on our ballot builder tool, and we'll also hear from a member of her campaign in just a little bit. And then we can go to the next slide. So the other district up for election, or where there is a seat up for election, is District 3. And we have Fitz Johnson, who is the incumbent Republican currently in office. Same deal here. He was unfortunately unable to attend in person, and was not able to send us a video. So please, find his platform and his stances on various issues available on our website, gmvp.org/vote, or scanning this QR code. And then lastly, we have Peter Hubbard, who is a Democrat running for District 3 as well. Peter is here in person, so you'll hear from him in just a little bit. But we also have information from his campaign website available on our website. Please use this information, share it with your friends and family in your network, amongst folks who could not be here today. You are all trusted sources of information, so that sharing will go a long way for us. So now that we've heard a little bit from some of the candidates who are unable to make it in person, I do want to call up the candidates or their proxies one by one to provide a quick overview of who they are, their background, and share a quick overview of their platform. And each of the candidates who are in person will have about 2 minutes to speak. So first, I would like to invite up Andrew Heaton, who is representing the Alicia Johnson campaign. Please give him a warm welcome.
As mentioned, my name is Andrew Heaton. I'm the campaign manager for Dr. Alicia Johnson. And as she stated there in her video, she apologized she couldn't be here today. She is in Savannah. She is a born and raised lifelong Savannah native and resident. She has spent the bulk of her career in the intersection of diversity, community, efficiency, working with organizations at all different levels, communities, or corporations, to find the best ways to plug in resources with the communities that need them and figuring out how to make sure that is done seamlessly so that everybody has a seat at the table and everybody is able to work in the most efficient manner possible. And that's exactly what she's looking to do to bring to the PSC in this race. The current commissioner has been in his seat now for well over a decade. And what we have seen is a continual lack of any pushback to Georgia Power, of any pushback. What we have seen consistently is that PSC, as it is composed now, and its current membership have just become a rubber stamp on Georgia Power and on anything that comes before them. And what Dr. Johnson is looking to bring is to truly be a voice for Georgians, everyday Georgians, the kind of Georgians who are struggling to figure out how they're going to pay their monthly bills. That's who she's looking to represent, not the corporations. And I look forward to talking with you more here soon.
Thank you so much, Andrew. And then next up, I would like to invite Peter Hubbard up to give a brief overview of who he is, his background, and his platform. So please give him a warm welcome.
Salaam alaikum. It's very nice to be here. And so I am Peter Hubbard. And the reason why I know how to say Salaam alaikum is because I lived in Morocco for 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer. And so had the chance to actually live in that environment for 2 years. And it was really transformational for me. In fact, seeing how the electrification of a village really changed the lives of a lot of people. So energy is fundamental to our way of life. And right now, the cost of energy is really skyrocketing, and there's really one reason for that, and it's because we have commissioners who are choosing to increase our bills. And they've voted for 6 rate hikes in the last 2 years. For the average family, that's around $600 to $700. So I feel strongly that that is not the right direction for this state. That and the fact that we're building a lot of fossil fuel power plants to build for data centers. All of those things are very important to me. And so what I did with all of this background, I have about 15 years of energy industry experience. And what I did was I went down to the Public Service Commission and started making the case for clean energy and for lower bills. And I've been doing that for 6 years through a nonprofit I founded. It's fallen on deaf ears. And so now this is the chance that we have to actually take a seat at the table. And that's important. So we haven't had elections in a very long time. And this is our moment to actually take control of our energy future and, as was said, bring the power back to the people. So thank you very much for having me here today.
Thank you so much. Awesome. So next we're going to move into a short candidate questionnaire where we'll have both Peter Hubbard as well as Andrew Heaton representing Dr. Alicia Johnson's campaign to be asked a few questions. So I would like to invite both of the candidates back up. Andrew will be the farthest seat to my right, and then Peter, you'll be on the seat to the second. All right. Yes, sir. Awesome. I would also like to invite up our moderator for this section, Chauncey Alcorn. So for those of you who are not familiar, Chauncey Alcorn is an Atlanta metro area-based reporter who covers Georgia State and Atlanta local politics for Capital B. He previously covered breaking and trending news for CNN Business, the Daily Mail, Mike, Fortune, and the New York Daily News, amongst many other major publications. Let's please give him a warm welcome as we move into the questionnaire section of today.
How you folks doing today? First, I want to thank you guys for having me at the Elif Institute. Just to give a little shameless plug, I'm Chauncey, as my colleague here just noted. I'm a reporter with Capital B Atlanta. We are a digital news nonprofit that centers Black voices in our coverage. We depend on the support of folks like yourselves to keep doing what we do. And so we appreciate you guys. Check us out at atlanta.capitalbnews.org or capitalbnews.org and subscribe to our newsletter if you support local news and local journalism and you understand how important it is. This is an issue that folks across the state have complained about, the high utility bills. So this is an opportunity for folks to chime in on that. We help provide some of that coverage. So we appreciate your support. First and foremost, I want to thank those representatives who came out today and the candidates. We're going to talk a little bit about energy affordability and burden. So my first question is, Georgia residents face one of the highest energy burdens in the country, where Georgia's power bills have gone up by almost $45 in the last year alone. What steps would you take as commissioner to lower energy costs, especially in low-income households? And second part of that question is, how would you ensure that policies like rate freezes are transparent and provide relief to customers?
First question, there we go. So what can we do to lower our power bills? They have gone up by even more than that. In fact, it's closer to about $60 a month, closer to $700 a year. And what we, some of these things are going to take a little bit of time to have an impact, but they are things we can do in the short, medium, and long term. So in the short term, what we can do is, first of all, right from the start, have some accountability. So when they say that there is a rate freeze, and this will get to the second question, we need to be very transparent and accountable about that. it's a rate freeze, but that's only half of your bill. The other half, fuel costs, or it was mentioned, there is the bills coming due for Hurricane Helene. Those are things that are going to increase your bill. But when we have accountability, we can actually see if those costs are just and prudent, and maybe they aren't. Maybe we can use our influence to lower them. It will take a majority. It will take 3 commissioners to actually have some impact, but that's why we're going to work so hard to flip that 3rd seat next year. Even before that, though, that accountability and just making sure that there is truth with respect to what is being put forward, I think that'll have a really strong impact on keeping bills from going up. But what we want to do is actually lower bills. And so there are things we can do in the medium and long term as well. One is certainly embrace more of the lowest cost resource that's out there. Solar energy, there's a reason why 90% of what was built around the world and in the US is solar and wind and batteries. It is God-given energy that arrives directly on our rooftops instead of sending money over billions of dollars, in fact, to Texas and Wyoming for coal and gas. So when we start to embrace that God-given free energy that comes from above, that will help to lower our power bills. It will take some time to do so. I want to be cautious and say, don't expect your power bill to drop in half. There's a number of things that have taken place, like building the most expensive power plant in the world. That's going to take a little bit of time, and those are going to be on our bills for some time to come. But another thing that we can do is, right now, it was mentioned earlier that Georgia Power Company makes a very large profit. It's in times over 12%, when in many other cases an electric utility might only make 9%. That difference is $700 million a year, and that could be adjusted immediately if we have 3 commissioners willing to do that. And that would go a long way to lowering power bills. So there's some really concrete things, Chauncey, that we can do in the short, medium, and long term to help lower power bills. And then the second part of your question?
It was how would you ensure that policies like rate freezes are transparent and provide relief to customers? Yeah, so really it is about, I mentioned that it's not quite truthful to say that that bills are frozen. It's really just half your bill, the rates that are frozen. So I think we do have to be very honest and transparent about what goes into your bill. It's important to know that you'll be paying for that expensive nuclear power plant for the next 60 years. We're paying for coal ash piles. There's 41 of them around the state. And the bill hasn't fully been paid for that as well. So I think it is very important for us to be transparent and honest when it comes to what goes into your power bill, why are your power bills going up, and what can we do to limit that or even reverse those increases. And I want to leave time for Andrew. Mr. Heaton, same question.
And Peter touched on a lot of things there, so I'll try to keep it brief. But first, I think when we hear about this rate freeze that was announced earlier this year, I don't think it's a coincidence that we should not ignore 2 things. One, in February of 2025, Georgia Power announced that their 2024 profits were well north of 20% above what they had brought in 2023. They are now making more profit per customer than any other energy company in the country. And so it's not a coincidence that when those facts are announced and they have an election coming up with 2 commissioners who have been very friendly to their agenda, all of a sudden they announce a rate freeze. We should also not ignore, as Peter was very keen to point out, that rate freeze masks a lot of things that they are still going to be able to allow Georgia Power to pass along to customers in the terms of cost, whether it be fuel, cleanup costs from Hurricane Helene. There are even some costs that they're being allowed to defer so that when the freeze is over, they can bring those back around. And so when we talk about transparency and acknowledging this, I think those are things that maybe should have been highlighted in that very glitzy press conference that was held on the steps of the Georgia Capitol, highlighting the freeze. Maybe those would have been some facts that would have been helpful to throw to the public's way along the way. So I think there is a long way to go. We can be more transparent about what's happening with things like rate freezes. And then in terms of how we can help folks, yes, some of it is simply saying no or not being so friendly next time Georgia Power comes along and asks for a rate increase. Or I think the bigger thing we could be doing now while this rate freeze is going on is there are programs that could be better funded and expanded to help low-income, disadvantaged families and single income households in Georgia that currently Georgia just does not take enough advantage of. Georgia Power is not pressed to fund more properly, that the state is not pressed to fund more properly. So we could be doing more to give relief to those who are most vulnerable to these kind of rate increases.
Gotcha. Second question we have is on renewable energy. In 2024, renewable resources accounted for 12% of Georgia's total in-state electricity generation, lagging behind in renewable energy compared to other states. What role do you see, and we'll start with you, Mr. Heaton, what role do you see the PSC playing when it comes to implementing and enforcing clean energy policies across the state?
Well, I mean, the PSC has a large voice in working with Georgia Power on how they develop their next generation and their next wave of plans and projects in terms of developing the grid, whether that's continuing to invest and develop the existing plants or developing new sources. And one of the things that we've seen when not pressed, Georgia Power will, like most companies would, you have to accept, most corporations are going to look for the lowest, lowest cost source. And for them, that is gas, that is coal, but that is also short-sighted thinking. It's not always true, but we don't press them enough. What's touted a lot is that Georgia is 7th in solar in the nation. And what I would counter is that is damning with faint praise, because the reality is that just shows how far behind the country is and where we should be in solar. But the reality is that when it comes to solar, we are 47th per capita. And that means, and that is illustrative of the fact that we do not do nearly enough to take advantage of both the solar potential of the state, but specifically in residential. We could be doing so much more to press residential solar, to tie that into the grid, to be doing things not only to help customers lower their own burdens, but also help Georgia Power and provide another resource if we would actually develop and expand residential solar. And instead we just say, well, I guess people don't want to do it. Well, no, we don't incentivize it. We don't make it worth their investment. We're not even saying to make it easy. We're saying just make it worth the investment like anything else. Like the state and the legislature are very often happy to hand out tax incentives to corporations to come in and invest and do things because they say it'll create jobs, but something that could help create an actual safeguard for our overall energy grid. If we expanded residential solar, there is a short-sightedness and a lack of willingness to engage, and we could absolutely have a voice to push there.
Mr. Hubbard, same question?
Right. So what can we do to bring more of those clean, low-cost, reliable resources like solar first and foremost? And we're at a very low level. This is, if you haven't noticed, a very sunny state, and we should have a lot more sun and solar power than we do right now. What I've done is, with my career, I have about 12 years of experience of modeling systems and understanding how to bring those resources to the market. But then I really wanted to understand how to develop them and make sure that we know what is a successful project, what makes a project succeed or fail. And for the last 3 years, that's what I've been doing. So really, with all of that experience, that is going to give me the tools and the toolkit to make sure that when we're looking at all of the different solutions that are on the table, that solar is first and foremost the one that we select, because it is very reliable. You can't think of a day when the sun hasn't risen. It is always there, and we can depend on it. And it is incredibly low cost. So I think just giving it the value that it should have. It's locked up behind the monopoly electric utility right now. When you put solar maybe on your rooftop, or if you subscribe to community solar, something like that, they're really only giving you a fraction of what that solar is worth. If you buy the energy, it's worth 21 cents. That's what you pay for a kilowatt hour. When you sell any extra solar you might have back onto the grid, you're only getting 7-8 cents a kilowatt hour, about 30% of that value. It's locked up behind the monopoly electric utility. That is what we need to do, is to give it its true value, and that will unlock it and allow us to develop it in places like communities, warehouse rooftops, and other locations. And that 12%, it's nowhere near where it needs to be. We could get to 40, 50, 60% before we have to start thinking about other resources, because you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. There's truly strength and diversity, even on the electric grid. So there's just a number of resources and ways to bring solar to market.
Related question, because I've covered this issue before. Mr. Hubbard, I know that you and I have discussed it. One of the pushbacks that Georgia Power and some of the commissioners would say is that Georgia doesn't have the capacity, or that there's the necessary energy that needs to be produced right now, both now and in the future as these data centers develop, that solar is not enough to support that. What do you guys say in response to that argument?
Well, I guess my easy response would say, okay, it's not, no one's asking them to go 100% solar. No one is suggesting, and that is so often when we have this debate, that is kind of the pushback. Oh, you just want us to go 100% solar? No one is suggesting to go 100% solar. We acknowledge, I think all the candidates in this field on both sides acknowledge gas and oil are not going anywhere. That they are going to be a part of the grid for the foreseeable future. We acknowledge that. We understand that. But we also understand what Peter just said. There is strength in diversity. There's resilience in diversity. And what we are simply suggesting is that we could be diversifying our grid, diversifying our energy sources, and when we do that diversification, lean a little heavier into solar, it would be worth it in the current and the future. That's all we're asking.
So the question is, someone will say, hey, solar might not be able to provide the capacity for all of this new business, these data centers coming to this state. That's verifiably false. And in fact, I've already run that analysis and prepared an alternative integrated resource plan, published that, put all of that analysis out for scrutiny. And when we talk about transparency, that's what I've been doing simply as a volunteer because this is important to me. So that's all on my nonprofit website. And as a commissioner, I'll be able to take that a step further and use the very tools that Georgia Power Company is using, which I've used before as a professional, and use their very tools to refute any assertion that we can't accommodate load growth, data centers, but making them pay their fair share, and all the new people that would like to move to the state. We can do it all and lower our power bills. And I've demonstrated that. The reason why we're not doing it is because there's more money to be made building gas plants and then in the transportation, the sale of that gas, because don't forget, Georgia Power Company has affiliate companies that make money off natural gas coming and going. That's why they're doing it, because they make more money that way.
Let's talk about oversight and accountability. As PSC Public Service Commissioners, you are responsible for overseeing utilities and ensuring fair practices. What measures, and we'll start with you, Peter, what measures would you take to ensure oversight of high energy users like data centers?
Data centers are getting a sweetheart deal, and that is why they're coming to the state of Georgia. So the Public Service Commission will have direct authority over how much a data center pays for electricity. There are other considerations like their water use, their land use, and certainly the fact that they're paying 0% sales tax and very little property tax, so very little revenue. And given all of that, is the juice worth the squeeze? My contention is no right now. And if you're a family and say your power bill is $500, if you could magically transform yourself into a data center, your power bill would suddenly be $100 for the very same energy. Data centers are getting a sweetheart deal, and that's why they're flocking to the state. So what we need to do is to look at all of the cost causation, and this is hidden behind trade secret. It's very difficult to discern unless you're a public service commissioner with access to that information and the heart in the right place to make sure that the costs are being allocated fairly. Right now, we shouldn't be paying 5 times as much as a data center for the very same energy. And data centers, they have been getting that sweetheart deal, but if they are asked to pay their fair share, and they do, they can actually help lower our costs by spreading costs over a larger pool of customers. So energy policy done well and done smartly can work for the people. Right now it's not, and it's really slanted overly towards corporate interests, towards data centers, towards private equity firms that are building data centers. And trust me, they have the money. We don't need to give them a sweetheart deal on the power.
Mr. Heaton, same question.
Yeah, not to rehash too much of what Peter said, because Peter nailed it. But the reality is data centers are being treated like they are any other corporation, like they are any other investment, like they're any other factory that comes into a town, both by the legislature and by Georgia Power and by the PSC. And the reality is they're not. In comparison to so many of those standard old school investment models, let's say a factory comes to town, we're going to give them a tax incentive that will hook them up to the water, we'll hook them up to the grid, but it's worth it because, and we'll give them a lot of land, but it's worth it because they're going to bring 500 jobs to this factory or 300 jobs to this factory. Well, data centers come in and say, yep, same for us, do the same for us. Well, the problem is they take up twice the land, take up 3 times the water, takes up all this energy, and they have 6, 7 people working there in a footprint of a factory that 20 years ago would have employed hundreds of people. Because the reality is these data centers, they will say that they are job creators, but they're not. Nobody's working there really. You have a handful of people keeping those running on a day-to-day basis, but they are churning massive profits for their owners. And so what it is time for the PSC, and the PSC will likely need to work in conjunction with the legislature, is to say this is not the same thing. And we cannot allow, and it is not just the price of the power they're paying, it is the natural resources they are chewing up in rural communities, oftentimes that don't have the voice to stand up for themselves, that are going to be most impacted if we don't start to at least pump the brakes as a unified force between the PSC and the legislature and say, no, we have to change the way this is working. And if we can, along the way, make sure that they're paying their fair share and not getting treated as if they are just a regular corporation, because they're not. And the resources they take up show that. And so how they're treated should be regulated like that.
So to kind of piggyback off that, though, what exactly can you guys do as commissioners, and in your case, Ms. Johnson, who you represent, what exactly would you do to increase oversight from the Public Service Commission on the data centers? There's a lot of ambiguity, as you guys know, about who is responsible for green lighting them, which my understanding is it's the localities and county commissioners, while the PSC is responsible for approving the plan for the infrastructure that's put into those centers. But what can be done? Because a lot of folks are angry about this, but they don't know what to do about it. So tell the folks what they can do.
So the PSC can do a lot about data centers. They can't do everything. There's no jurisdiction over water or the tax abatements, but they can control how much they pay for their energy, and also even ask things like bring your own energy resource. And data centers, they certainly have the ability to pay for energy resources like solar, wind, batteries, and other things of that nature. They don't necessarily have to be right there where that data center is. They can be in other locations. In fact, there's a really wonderful solution where you take all the rooftops with solar and garages with batteries and tie them together with software, and you can avoid building an entire power plant by just using the resources that we already have more efficiently. So there's a number of ways that we can ask them to pay their fair share. I will say just directly, the Public Service Commission can simply make them pay more for what for the energy that they are consuming right now. I think there's also a hidden cost that we need to be worried about, in that we're building infrastructure for them that needs to be paid off over 40 years, substations, gas-fired power plants. And if these data centers decide to decamp to another state because we increase the tax abatement from 0% to say now they have to pay a nominal amount. Maybe they decide to move, and all that infrastructure we just built for them, who's left holding the bag? We are. And so, we have to be very careful about that. But also, again, we can ask those data centers if they'd like to do business in the state to bring their own resources to help pay for some of the clean energy that we know they want. Meta, Google, they have their own targets for clean energy. And if we're building fossil fuel power for them, at some point they're going to say no thank you and move on. So there's a real danger that we're building infrastructure that we're not going to use fully, and we will be left holding the bag. I just think there's a number of ways that we can help to bring that business to the state, but do it responsibly so that they're paying their fair share and not polluting our air, earth, water, and most importantly, Kim mentioned those three, but the most important is our people as well. Public health is incredibly important, and that's not paid attention to. That's not the question, but that's something that I will pay very close attention to with respect to data centers and the fossil fuel infrastructure that they're bringing.
While we're on the topic of community engagement and transparency, many Georgians feel disengaged from PSC decision-making, often with limited opportunity for public input. Peter, how would you increase the overall transparency and community engagement throughout the PSC process, including multilingual and immigrant communities?
That's a great question, and I enjoy coming to events like this. As a public service commissioner, you will see me out here on the road talking to people, trying to demystify the PSC. It was mentioned that I drew the short straw and I'll have to run again for re-election. Normally it would be a 6-year term. I have a 1-year term if I'm successful, when I'm successful. And so I'll have to immediately re-engage and start campaigning again and getting the word out. So I think I have a real job in front of me of demystifying the Public Service Commission and getting out on the road and making sure that you all know how important it is in your lives. But I also know that we can invite the public in. The far corners of Georgia, you know, we lived through a pandemic. We all know how to use Zoom, even if there are technical difficulties sometimes. We can invite folks in and make sure that they know that there are important decisions being made monthly, really. In fact, on October 21st, that's when all of the fossil fueled infrastructure that was approved in the last power plan on October 21st, that's when the commission will be looking at the power purchase agreements where Georgia Power inks a deal with those fossil fueled power plants and locks it in. And that will be up for debate. Of course, we know which direction it will go in because of the commission that we have, but important decisions are happening all the time. And I think it'll be my job to demystify that and bring the public into that decision-making process.
Mr. Heaton, same question.
So one of the great things about Dr. Johnson is Dr. Johnson has built most of her career around community engagement. And in addition to her daytime job as a nationally recognized consultant, she has also spent time at the head of many nonprofits, including several years as executive director of Step Up Savannah, which was a community organizing group that was exactly built to engage with parts of the community that didn't always have a voice in the city of Savannah. And as a commissioner on the PSC, she's already committed to building out a community advisory council made up of several different groups representing several different voices throughout Georgia to make sure that everybody has a seat at her table, at least, and that everybody can, who wants to, has a chance to hear from her, to know what's going on at the PSC, to know what's going on with upcoming votes, to provide feedback, to provide advice, and for her to listen to the community as well as those voices coming to her. She plans on spending time out in the community, and that includes not just the areas of her district, which obviously will be important because, you know, the funny thing about this PSC is it is built up by districts, and there are certain geographic regions that each one will represent. Dr. Johnson would be representing coastal Georgia and areas reaching up to Metro. Mr. Hubbard would be representing 3 counties in the central Metro Atlanta area. But I think all of the commissioners should be talking to all Georgians because at the end of the day, every Georgian has a vote on all of these districts. And so I think it is important, and Dr. Johnson is committed to making sure she is talking to as many Georgians as possible and giving as many people a chance to have a voice and have a seat at the table.
Last question from me, and then we're going to go to our audience for some audience questions. We're talking about border impact of the PSC decisions. PSC decisions affect not only our utility bills, but also economic development and climate resilience. Mr. Heaton, how does Ms. Johnson see the PSC's role in shaping a just and equitable energy future for Georgians?
Well, so I think one of the things we have to talk about when we talk about just and equitable future of both energy solutions, our grid, is to talk about the various levels. Obviously, the one that jumps to the forefront of everybody's mind is the financial aspect, and making sure that both the rates being set for everyday payers are fair. And look, you know, we often, in the way we talk, it can sound like we're trying to paint Georgia Power as the villain and we're against profits. No one's saying Georgia Power shouldn't make profits, but there is a difference between making profits and being the most profitable energy company in the country and making more profits per customer. There's a difference. And so trying to balance that out and bring a little bit of relief to everyday Georgians, especially those who are struggling the most with their monthly bills, is obviously a priority, but it's also about justice for the health and the environment of both our people and our state, and making sure that we are making investments in the grid and we are developing future power solutions that are not just based around. We are determined to continue to invest in 18th and 19th century solutions in the 20th century, in the 21st century. And that has to change. We have to acknowledge and understand that we can build a grid that is cleaner, more efficient, does not take so many of our resources in terms of land, does not dirty our waters, does not create coal ash ponds, does not, get into our air. We can do that, but we have to hold all of the stakeholders at the table accountable to that.
Mr. Hubbard, same question.
Andrew, on behalf of Dr. Johnson, touched on the immediate effect of paying high power bills. And no one wants to pay a power bill that looks like a car payment or a mortgage, which is what they've been looking like if you're a Georgia Power Company customer. And I'll just make a quick note, even if you pay your bill to an EMC or a municipal electric authority, the impacts that the decisions made at the PSC also have an indirect impact on you as well. You live in the state, you have to breathe the air, and eventually those bad decisions like Plant Vogtle, those trickle down to even your bills. But beyond just the immediate impact of these really high power bills, I'm also focused on things that maybe aren't so transparent in terms of justice and equity, and the fact that there is a generational wealth transfer that's happening right now. We're building things that our kids and our grandkids are going to have to be paying off, and they're going to have to pay for the coal ash cleanup that we're continuing to burn. Right? We just extended our coal plants, the 2 coal plants we have, to 2040 now, instead of 2032, so that we can accommodate more data centers. We don't have to, as we've already demonstrated. There's analysis to show that. But I'm really concerned about that generational transfer of wealth from future generations and our kids now to folks that are shareholders of Southern Company. And then I also mentioned this briefly, but it can't.
Okay. Before I do that,
section. Before we go back to audience Q&A, I want to note that everybody has a really incredible Georgia PSC voter guide available at their seat that has some questions to consider asking PSC candidates. So please review it, use the information there as we go into the next section. Thank you so much.
so I will take it to the audience. Audience questions. Anybody want to raise just their hand and we'll come to you, bring you the mic. Don't be shy.
Thank you both so much for answering all these questions and imparting such information on us. So I'll ask a broad question and then I'll give kind of a narrow example of that. The broad question is, what impact, if any, does the Public Service Commission have on tax rates? And the kind of, if you kind of the big picture outlook and the example is from the One Big Beautiful Bill, it sounds like Trump has, or the bill itself kind of narrowed tax credits available for solar paneling for residents, but expanded it for corporations. I'm curious as to, like, from a state perspective, what does the commission do, if anything, with respect to, like, okay, if someone wants to get solar paneling on their house and their energy, like their tax cuts to that, do you guys have any involvement in that, or is it?
Yeah, the context here is, the question, just to repeat it briefly, is that the billionaire bill, as I call it, from this past July, it yanked the rug out from under renewable energy tax credits. So typically you could have 30 to 50% of a solar project paid for by the government once it came online. It was part of the reason why it was so affordable. Even without those tax subsidies, which will go away indefinitely, beginning in 1 year after that bill was passed, so July of 2026, even without those subsidies, it is still the cheapest and most reliable and most sustainable form of energy. So, one of the things that we can do is, I mentioned that you only get about 30% of the value from solar if you have it on your rooftop and sell it back. We certainly have, public service commissioners have direct authority to change that payback. And so That's one way to sort of compensate for the fact that there's not going to be as much federal support, as we can increase the amount of money that you're getting for the small solar power plant that's on your roof. We won't be able to restore all of that because it's 30 to 50% is quite a lot from the federal government. Let's hope it comes back at some point, and it will. But the net result is there will be fewer solar projects built because the credits aren't there, and so our power bills will go up. I've seen analysis that as a result of the billionaire bill, power bills will go up about 9% here in Georgia over time. And it's because we keep making the wrong decisions to go towards fossil fuels when we know that is not the right answer. So it is going to take a few different things, but I think just restoring the value of solar today is going to go a long way to making up for the loss at the federal level of those tax credits.
Peter pretty much nailed it, so I just want to add one thing in that. What that question and what Peter's answer is illustrative of is the fact that for a lot of the things we're talking about, there's not one body that has all the solutions. And it's going to take a PSC beginning to push towards solutions, working with a legislator or a legislature that is open and advancing some of these other solutions from the other angles, working in tandem for us to really create a comprehensive change as we're suggesting. And so even some of these things like tax rates, there are certain things the PSC can do, and there are certain things that need to happen from the state capitol and from under the dome. And what I would say is there are legislators who are open to working on several of these solutions, and not just Democrats. You know, there are Republicans who are open and trying to work on some of these solutions. And so I think, you know, folks like you all out there in the community pushing on both the PSC and the legislators under the dome is the combo to get some of these solutions advanced.
Anybody else, audience questions?
So one of the sponsoring agency representatives mentioned that there's a proposal in the legislature to change the terms from 6 years to 8 years. And I'm wondering why that is and what the effect will be.
I honestly hadn't heard about that, but it doesn't surprise me. I know that there was a bill to just change the name of the Public Service Commission to the Public Utility Commission so the general public could better understand what the PSC does. I hadn't heard about that. 8 years. I would expect that it's really just to entrench the Republicans and allow them to stick around for longer. I would expect that would allow them to extend the current incumbents and give them an extra 2 years. It's all part and parcel with a lot of the election shenanigans that have taken place. It was mentioned that I'm the one that drew the short straw and will run for a 1-year term and have to immediately start rerunning again. But every time they put a barrier in front of me or some other obstacle, it just makes me want to work that much harder. So they underestimated and thought that just having a 1-year term would dissuade people from running. Well, I'm here, and I won't let that dissuade me.
Similar to Peter, I have not heard a lot about the legislation trying to turn the terms from 6 to 8 years. And I'd be curious to see how much legs that would have. For as much as we might cast aspersions on certain members of the dome, many of them at least skew towards basic democratic norms. And I think even a 6-year term is pushing it. And I can't imagine many would be apt to try to push to 8. What I would say is, though, the PSC was an institution formed in the late 1800s, and it was meant to be a shield against the original monopoly in Georgia, the railroads. And it was meant to be a voice and a shield for the people and for them to be able to push back and make sure the railroads were playing a fair game with the people of Georgia. And over the years, which monopoly and which industry is being regulated by the PSC has changed and shifted, advanced, and it's been several different that have been the key focal point until the point we got to now where it's Georgia Power is really the key focal point, even though there are a couple of other things that the PSC regulates and handles. The Georgia Power is kind of the focal point. The PSC has also tended to be where the legislature tinkers the most with how it's composed over the years. Originally, it was a 3-person body. Then it became a 5-person body. The terms have shifted here and there. Originally, it was 5 statewide seats there was no districts. Then it was 5 districted seats, but voted on statewide. So for whatever reason, the PSC has tended to be a place where the legislature likes to play around and toy and experiment with ideas. So while I wouldn't find the idea of 8 years shocking if that was being proposed, I would assume it's probably not going to go very far. And I think if you see it starting to gain steam, we should all make sure it does not go very far.
Peter, do you want to respond to that? All right, okay. And if you guys can, just say your name and what part of the metro area you're from.
I'm Andrea Young-Jones out of South Fulton. I am the Government Relations Public Policy Director for Georgia One. I want to add some clarity to the statement about 8 years. Okay, so it's in the Georgia Constitution that a PSC commissioner can only serve 6-year terms. It's in the Constitution. In 2024, the state legislature passed a bill in order to extend the time period of the current legislatures because of some of the lawsuits that came out in the previous year. In the previous year, in 2022 election, the GCV and some other nonprofits brought a suit against the state of Georgia saying that how they elect commissioners was a violation of the Voting Rights Act. Basically, it diluted African American votes because you had to live in a particular district, but you are voted on statewide. And there was a misnomer, there's a misconception that they represent a district. They don't, they just have to live there, okay? But they are voted on statewide. And so what happened is that based on waiting for the judge to come back on the ruling, the state legislature, the Secretary of State said, okay, we're gonna cancel the election and we'll pick it up in 2024. Well, then the state legislature passed a bill saying, okay, well, we won't do 2024, we'll do 2025. What happened is that it created a domino effect for the legislators that are already in session. So you have some legislators that are going to, some commissioners that are going to serve 8-year terms because of that. So the law has not changed. It's because of their shenanigans that, which is what he was speaking of, that has allowed people to serve 8-year terms without being voted on between a particular time, and that's the problem. That's why it's important to vote, no matter what, because because it spills over. So I just want to add context.
Just real quickly, Dr. Johnson is running against the person who's in year 9 of his 6-year term, I believe, and then the person I'm running against has never been elected, and he's in his 5th year.
If you could just say your name and where you're from.
Jay Bassett, and I've been around in this space a long time. So I want to come back to, as we talk about transparency, right? And we already know we're all subsidizing the industry way above. They're paying what, 4 or 5 cents, 6 cents a kilowatt hour that we're all paying for. And part of that is the idea of transparency and engagement within the commission, right? I watched the last hearings and I watched people get up there that were treated very poorly by the commissioners, right? So I know you mentioned engagement from a personal perspective. What I would be interested to know is how do you move from informing and hearings, I've done hearings, to engagement of letting people in the door in a more meaningful way to have a better voice. And even though there may just be 2 of you out of there, what can you do to start changing the culture of how the commission runs to provide at least the willingness to hear voices that maybe they haven't been receptive to in the past without turning them into insults? And I'd really be interested to hear kind of your thoughts on that.
I'll start by saying that you're correct. There's 2 seats up on a 5-body board. And so we will have to find ways, especially if Dr. Johnson and I would like to work for the people and find ways to implement bill relief and bring down bills. We're going to have to work with the other side. And so if it is in the interest of the public and can serve to lower bills, then I'll work with anyone who is willing to do that. And I think that's important because ultimately it's the Public Service Commission and we're there to serve the public. So, I mean, that's maybe the first thing that I would say. Also, I want to lean heavily on my background as an energy expert, as someone who has run models and can kind of dig into the minutia, but then bring it up and distill it down into a bite-sized nugget for someone. And I think that's going to be important to talk through the many complicated steps. This is technical stuff. It takes, it's 15 years now that I've been doing this, and I'm still learning more about the industry. But I think it's going to be important to distill it down and just give the information to folks so that they can understand what the implications are. And if they'd like to come and speak, that's important. But, you know, right now you get 3 minutes to just say your piece, and they say thank you, and they shuffle you along. That's about the extent of the engagement right now at the Public Service Commission. It would be nice if we had, you know, there are working sessions going on right now to try and work out how to do things like co-locate solar with some of the small and medium-sized businesses. There are these working groups that we could expand and have more of, and that can help to bring in some more of the public. So I want to do my level best to make sure, I've mentioned this a few times, but demystifying the PSC, I'd like other people to understand the work that I'm doing, and so it's important to bring the public into that.
I don't think it's a coincidence. The level of investment we see out of the PSC, and it's not just PSC, it's a lot of governmental entities. When it comes to communications, when it comes to outreach, and to your point, not just basic community outreach, not just opening 20 minutes on the floor, an hour on the floor for public hearing, which is only going to be attended by the people who potentially don't work or have flexible enough schedule, which is a minuscule amount of the overall citizen population. I don't think it's an accident that is basically what amounts to engagement from the PSC, and they say the box is checked. There's a reason that corporations that need customers and need engagement spend millions and sometimes billions in dollars in communications in both platforms and channels and figuring out the best way to reach and send their message out to the community. Now, I'm pretty positive the PSC is not going to put billions of dollars into communication anytime soon. But I think what we could ask for, and starting with the individual commission offices of Peter and Dr. Johnson, and then growing once there's maybe a willing majority, is creating true channels that reach the public on a consistent basis, that communicate what's going on proactively and not just reactive reaction to people reaching out and asking questions, but actually pushing out information, letting folks know in a way that is accessible and understandable, and not just putting out the technocratic bare minimum that is going to be confusing to the majority of the general public, but doing it in a way that actually engages them and helps the public understand it is truly meant to be educational. There's an educational piece that is left on the floor so often, not just the PSC, but by so many of our government organizations and levers of power, that we could do something to try to reach out and say, here's what's going on proactively, and here's what you need to understand, here's what we'd like your feedback on, here's what would be helpful for us to understand from the public. There's so much more that we could be doing proactively, and the PSC could be a great place to start a lot of this. And so I think that's where it starts, is reaching out and not just relying on the bare minimum public speaking moments at the sessions, and not just saying, well, it's available on our government YouTube channel, which gets less airtime in my household than the Roku screensaver. So, yeah.
Got time for one more question.
Hello, my name is Zita. And the question I had today is, since we all know that Georgia Power is kind of a monopoly going on, what can you as the Public Service Commissioner do to kind of give us a choice in who we choose to be our power provider and put in some competitive pricing? What can you do, and what are you doing right now, and what would you like to do?
This is where it gets to Andrew's point about the Public Service Commission having to work with the legislature, because for the last 52 years, since 1973, we've had the Georgia Territorial Service Act, which carves up the state into here's where Georgia Power Company customers are, and here's where EMCs and municipals are, and never the twain shall meet. Only if you're a very large customer is there any kind of competition between Georgia Power and anyone else. But you basically have to consume about 100 households worth of energy to get that choice. Households don't have that choice. It's a monopoly. You have to choose whoever is there. So it will take an act of the Georgia General Assembly to change that. But that doesn't mean that there aren't certain things. I mean, community solar is a way to sort of aggregate some of that, those households together. We might have to be a little bit creative, but I will have to work with the legislature to find ways to increase the amount of competition. It was designed this way to give a monopoly. You don't want to build two sets of wires. That's inefficient. So we give a monopoly to the utility. But the trade-off is you have a regulatory watchdog that oversees it and makes sure that the spending is just and prudent, which isn't happening now. So it's either a monopoly or competition or something in between, but we will have to work with the legislature on that to open it up to more competition. In the absence of that, though, it's the Public Service Commission is that competition that keeps prices just and reasonable. And so it'll be incumbent on me to make sure that the spending is reasonable, as it would be if there were a choice of your energy provider. The only real choice you have is you can consume less or none of the power that's coming to you from Georgia Power by taking control of your own energy future and putting solar on your rooftop. And solar, you need batteries if you want to replace all of your energy use. And so we're going to be dependent on Georgia Power for some period of time, but you can still reduce your dependence on them. And that's one way to have that choice. We're kind of stuck with the four corners of the bill that we have that I mentioned, but it doesn't mean that we can't be creative around the edges and work towards new solutions to open up competition and new sources of energy.
Andrew, you want to tackle that one?
I think Peter answered it extremely well. I mean, to the point that this is one of those areas that we are kind of bound by what the legislature and what's in the legislature, what's in the Constitution. There's only so much we could do there. And one thing Peter said there, you don't want two sets of power lines. There is some basic infrastructural common sense to have singular companies servicing geographic areas. But that doesn't mean that we should necessarily never push back, that we should just sign off on anything that company happens. And unfortunately, for the last several years, that seems to be what we've had at the PSC is we've not had regulators trying to provide a voice, provide any kind of pushback or debate or discussion. We've essentially had rubber stamps on whatever Georgia Power wanted, which is how you end up with a company with nationally #1 ranked in profit per capita. That there is a balance in there somewhere that we can find.
All right, guys, I want to thank you. Well, we're out of time. If anybody else has questions, feel free to approach our candidates and the representatives after the event. I want to thank Mr. Hubbard and Mr. Heaton for participating in our panel. And thank you guys for joining us. This is important. Again, I want to stress, Election Day is November the 4th. Advanced voting, early voting starts on Tuesday. You don't have to wait till Election Day. This is important. If you don't want your bills going, I don't want to say, well, who does want their bills to go up? Nobody wants their bills to go up. Let's just be honest. If you don't want your bills going up, and you have a view on it, this is your opportunity to weigh in on it. And we appreciate you guys for coming out here today.
Shukran jazilan.
Thank you so much, Chauncey, for helping facilitate this discussion, and thank you to our candidates who were present for giving their insight on the questions. I hope you all learned a lot from this conversation. I know I did personally as well. For our candidates who were not able to make it today, Fitz Johnson and Tim Echols, I want to reiterate that we have our ballot builder tool available for folks at gmvp.org/ballot and our online voter landing page at gmvp.org/vote, where you can find their specific stances on the same issues that we've talked about today. So please explore them to get a whole and a nuanced understanding of the issues that are at hand. So we are about to formally close out our event, but before we do so, I would like to invite Kim Scott Cook from Georgia One to provide some important election information so that you can all be confident when you go to the polls starting next week. Let's please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you again. Thank you to our candidates for attending, our moderator, for facilitating this important discussion around the Georgia Public Service Commission. I am now in the role of the League of Women Voters Georgia. just to make some announcements in regards to some very important voter education information and dates about the upcoming election. So first of all, I just wanted to say that Vote 411 is the League's one-stop nonpartisan voter guide where voters can find personalized election information, compare the candidates. So again, the candidates that weren't here are the actual incumbents, the ones that are currently in office, which is Fitz Johnson and Tim Echols. And then we have their opposing candidates, which is Peter Hubbard and Dr. Alicia Johnson. You can also learn about ballot measures and more. So if you would like to get involved, please email vote411@lwvga.org. So that's League of Women Voters, Georgia.org. Wanted to give some shout outs and thanks to I'm sorry, hold on one second. I want to make sure that I'm pronouncing it correctly. Icon Filmworks. So Icon Filmworks is actually the company that's responsible for the live stream. You can review it on our Georgia One's website, and we'll also be giving the recording link to Georgia Muslim Voter Project so we can get that out to all the attendees and then all of our demographics and participants that weren't able to attend today. Lastly, early voting starts October 14th, which is when? Tuesday. It runs all the way until the 31st. And then the general election is actually on Tuesday, November 4th. I really, really want to stress today and every day, please tell all registered voters that this is a statewide election. So regardless if you live in Districts 2, Districts 3, Andrea said it very well. It's just the candidates need to live in those districts. Everybody votes for Georgia Public Service Commission. So if you're really concerned about your high power bills, if you don't pay a Georgia Power bill, but you're concerned about data centers coming in your communities, AI, cryptocurrency mining coming in your communities, which they are, Georgia is the 4th largest in our nation for data center growth. It's very, very important that we all come out and vote for Georgia Public Service Commission. So again, early voting Tuesday, October 14th through the 31st. The general election is on November 4th. For those of our parents, maybe grandparents that actually do mail-in voting, please let them know that they need to get their ballots in the appropriate time. And if your precinct has changed, go to GeorgiaMyVoterPage.com so that you can put in your credentials and find out where you are voting if you plan to vote on Tuesday, November 4th. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kim, for that really helpful information. Again, this is our opportunity to make a difference on our energy bills, what our future looks like here in the state of Georgia, as well as our overall sustainability and resiliency as a state. So please, please, please make sure you go out and vote. If you haven't made a plan already, you have many options: voting early, starting the 14th, as mentioned, voting in person on Election Day on November 4th, or submitting a vote by mail or absentee ballot as soon as possible. Thank you all so much once again for joining us. Please feel free to use the rest of the time to engage with our organizations and tables present, engage with the candidates and representatives who are present from the campaigns, as well as get election resources from all organizations. Once again, thank you so much to our partners, Peach State Muslim Action, Georgia Wand, as well as Georgia Conservation Voters Education Fund for making this event possible. I hope you all have a great rest of your day and have a good one.